Greetings and welcome to HillCrest Wine Club Notes. We're second to last shipment of this season, going out beginning of March and that, and I'm going to just take a second and introduce the wines to you, and we'll get into tasting and talking a little bit more about them. But a couple of things. One is that, you know, when we bring these wines in, we always have a little bit extra, and if you're interested, we have 3 wines right now that we have a little bit, and if you're interested in your wine club shipment, kind of rounding out a case, and there's something you really enjoyed, because these wines are so rare, they're hard to find, please feel free to give us a holler, and we'll show you what those wines are. Anyway, to get started, we're going to actually start off with something that's new and old. So Terlodego, but 2019. So this is 4.5 years in barrel, which is the longest we've ever aged Terlodego prior to bottling. So super interesting, and kind of once again we're walking down that path, that extended aging of a lot of the great classic wines of Europe, Chianti Reserva, Rioja Reserva, where you're talking 4 and 5 years. Pre-release aging, both barrel as well as bottle. Then we're going to move into an area of Italy for our international selection from Campania that is basically Naples down to about Pompeii, so kind of the shin of the boot, and taste of variety that has been around since at least 1 AD, we know, but probably something that the Romans and the Greeks drank a long time prior to that. So anyway, and then finish up with a brand new release of Riesling out of the Mosel, out of Maring, very beautiful ungrafted vineyard from a vintage that is very different than the typical classic Mosel, so very different architecture. We'll talk about that, and also how you apply that texture to food and wine pairing. So without further ado, 2019 Terlodego. So in a world that most people are releasing 22 reds, maybe 21 reds, here's a 2019. So this wine's a little over 4 years in barrel. Terlodego, once again, it's said that Italy has 2,800 varieties in the ground. As you drop out of the Alps from like Innsbruck, Austria, kind of on the south side of the Alps, you drop down into Bolzano, which is a major, beautiful town. A lot of people go on vacation there, kind of alpine-ish. Then you drop down into kind of a plain that ends up in what's called Trentino. And on that plain is a wine called Terlodego Rotagliano that was a variety that was known for producing great wines back in history, in modern times, going back to like the late 1800s, early 1900s, began to be used just to kind of make ordinary wine. And then a young lady by the name of Elisabetta Foradori in the 90s decided to take that and build that variety Terlodego into the world-class variety it really deserves to be. And I've mentioned this in prior videos when we've released Terlodego, but I had the opportunity of meeting her at Mondavi when she was very young, in her 20s, and that was my first introduction to that grape variety Terlodego. Today it's planted many places throughout Italy. It's planted in Australia, South Africa, California, which is where we got our cuttings. When we came up in 2001 out of Napa Valley, I brought cuttings up into this area, and we've been producing it now since 2015, but planted since 2001. So once again, a pioneering effort here in the Umpqua Valley, with HillCrest doing something kind of out of the norm. And as you know, that's kind of leapfrogged into other Italian varietals and that we do. So Terlodego is very interesting. It's kind of a deeper, darker version of, we'd say, a medium season red. And so what that means is, actually, Terlodego is somewhat related. One of the parents, Pelerson of Syrah, is also a sibling of Terlodego. Tends to be beautiful acidity, pretty dark color. And those are the 2 reasons it's primarily used in other regions of Italy, either standalone wine or oftentimes blended to kind of fill in the whole of whatever's done locally. But can be very, very rich. It's hard to ripen. It's a little bit of a sensitive variety. People talk about, and there, you get this in places, certain parts of Europe have a very hard time with Malbec, yet you take it to Argentina and it really flourishes. I find the same thing with Terlodego here. Terlodego is known as having a lot of issues when you get into Terlodego Rotaglianos being somewhat difficult to grow, that we don't really experience here. So another beautiful reason to be in Umpqua Valley once again. So very dark color, lighter than it was when we put it to barrel, but once again, it's a darker variety. When you dry farm and you're on hillsides, once again, the vine's response to protect the moisture in that fruit while that seed's maturing is to shrink the size of the grape, thicken the skin. That all gives us the flavor, intensity that we expect in great wines, that power. And then we go looking for the elegance, and that elegance is the acidity. Terlodego tends to naturally be a kind of a higher acid variety. It's typically amongst, if not, the last variety that we pick, and that we let that fruit hang a long time and produce these very kind of beautiful, perfumey, dark wines. So anyway, a little bit kind of ruby on the edge, but still fairly dark for a wine of this age. But one of the things I love about aging wines is that it's like cooking. When you make pasta sauce and we put it on some pasta and eat it 30 minutes after we've made it, you know, it's kind of disjointed. And we always talk about the next day you take the leftovers to lunch and you bite into that little piece of beef and you taste the carrot and the onion and everything. Same thing I get in the smell of this. I get this beautiful red fruit with kind of an earthiness just really kind of melded together. But there's a very peculiar smell that I absolutely love, and I don't smell it in Terlodego produced out of the place. I've tasted Terlodegos out of California. I've had one from Australia, quite a few, of course, from Italy. And there's almost like a elderberry kind of vegetal kind of smell to it. And when I say vegetal, we think of like vegetables. This is kind of like this beautiful kind of sweet green component to it. And this has just a really, really beautiful kind of sweet roundness that ties into that red fruit. The elegance of aging, once again, the time integrates things. On the mouth, you know, usually when we taste wines, the scale is much larger. If I have something that's 2 or 3 years in the barrel, you'll get more weight to it, more power. This is very, very even, kind of opens up gently once again. You get the acid and the tannin, it's definitely there, but everything's kind of, time, you know, like a rock falling in the river, it's kind of, has square edges and that, and in time it kind of is polished, and that's what you really begin to see with wines. When you take a really great wine, I try to grow for great intensity, but the wines are kind of chunky when they're young, and that time in the barrel just kind of polishes that outside edge, and so you get all those beautiful flavors, plus the bouquet of a little bit of time in the barrel and the aroma of the fruit, and then just kind of that very elegant edge. So I think super beautiful wine. It's got power, but it's also got that elegance, and it's very polished for a wine kind of this scale. But something beautiful, spring lamb. We're coming into season here not too long. Something like this would be beautiful to kind of to cut through something very rich, a beautiful risotto, mushroom risotto or something this time of year. To taste. That's good. Okay, for our international, Cantina Olivella. Olivella means spring, and this is a winery. It's only been around since about 2004, but it's one of the most historic areas of the world. One of the oldest wine growing regions in Italy. We know that grapes have been grown there since the 12th century BC. So the Byzantines were there, the Greeks were there, as I mentioned, the Romans in this. That area, so if you've ever been to the Amalfi Coast or heard of the Amalfi Coast, that's part of this area. But this really is around, this wine comes off of the Mount Senna, which is on Vesuvius. So in 79 AD, when Pompeii was covered in ash, there were over 200 wine bars. And the top area for wine in all of the Roman Empire was Vesuvius. And there was a very famous wine called Falernum. Falernum was taken all over the Roman Empire. That was considered to be the finest wine. It's very interesting. They have in Pompeii some of the wine bars where the word symposium comes from means wine tasting. And so the symposium, you go to a symposium and they'd have troughs of wine of these famous wines and take your cup and kind of fill it up and you take it and drink it. So Falernum was this wine that was very, very well known, was considered the most expensive wine. And actually the first, we rank vineyards. You go to Burgundy and they talk about Village wines and the Premier Crus and the Grand Crus. The first wine that was ever done to in the world, we don't know exactly when that started, was Falernum in the Roman Empire. Anyway, this is a grape that Pliny the Elder wrote the first book on agriculture based out of this area in the 1st century AD. And so he wrote about this grape variety, which was called Colombina at that point. This is a grape variety called Piedirosso, which means red foot. And they say it looks like a pigeon foot, kind of the cluster kind of splays out at the end a little bit. But a variety that is rarely seen as a straight variety, a variety that's been around a millennia plus. plus, we know, probably goes back 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th century BC, but we don't know exactly the beginnings. But the 1st century AD, once again, that was the first documented write-up on that. There's also a white variety that's equally as famous as this, and there's another red called Olianico. That white is, what would I say? It's called Fiano di Avellino, and Fiano is the name of the grape. It means bee, basically, because it attracts the bees, the smell and the perfume. Both these wines were like insanely famous and super beautiful, that if we ever have the opportunity, I'd like to source one and let you know about that and send that out as well. But anyway, VIPT means to drink well, so we'll see if this wine drinks well. Wow. Right here I get a lot of perfume. I get this beautiful like pitted cherry perfume kind of coming out of the glass. Very, very red fruit, which is not typical of a warmer area. So that latitude would be fairly warm. Also being on the Mediterranean being a warm body of water, unlike here in Oregon, we go to the coast to cool down. There they go to the coast to warm up. This wine has beautiful perfume that we usually don't associate with an area that warm. Beautiful, just sweet. It just draws you in. Not sweet, but just this beautiful, bright red, deep character. This wine's showing. We opened it last night, had a little bit just to taste, to kind of enjoy some, kind of freshen up my thoughts on it. And this wine's actually now showing more power. It's got some deeper weight. It's almost like a kind of turbocharged Pinot. It's got this weight, but still kind of fragile, nice little tannic structure. What's very interesting about this wine is it's 12.5% alcohol. And there are, usually when you get into a warm area, you expect much higher alcohols. You get into the south of France, it's not uncommon, 15% alcohol. You get into Napa Valley, there's a lot of 15, 16% alcohol wines. This wine's still super fragile, elegant, fresh, which is beautiful. Super interesting. Once again, you rarely see wines from Campania. This is something that, you know, as part of the wine club is really kind of take you on a little vacation someplace you haven't been and open your eyes to what this producer is doing. They have about 25 acres broken up into different parcels, kind of on the sides of Vesuvius, and you know, a lot of little places parked here and there. They're own rooted, which is interesting. So they're very sandy soils, which is unusual in volcanic areas. Usually you have a lot of clay, and these sandy soils prevent the insect phylloxera from growing in. So this is one of the few places in the world you see a lot of what we say own rooted plants and that. But anyway, I think you'll enjoy it. Super classic. To finish up with, so our dear friend, somebody I met over 30 years ago, moving on almost 40 years ago, he's a gentleman. His son is actually taking over now, Herré, and he makes very, very classic wines. This, I kind of alluded to in the beginning, is a very different kind of vintage. So classically, I think of European wines, German wines included, of course, as cutting, having beautiful focused acidity, having this weight, but kind of tight around the acidity instead of like hitting the palate and falling everywhere. 22 vintage is a pretty warm vintage, and because of that, you see a lot more kind of width to the wine. When the wine comes across the palate, we'll see kind of this weight and this richness. Because of that, it's kind of more of what I'd say like an entree wine, more of a food wine. And where Riesling is super beautiful with food, usually it's kind of medium to lighter texture. This is something that's quite a bit richer. So we'll take a first smell. So 2022 LR Feinherb. Yeah, and so the nose kind of tells me the story of a warmer vintage too. It's a very, I'm sure the younger people there probably wonder what this is, but we all remember the older folks, kumquat, the tree you used to see on the West Coast quite a bit. Kind of something that had very clean, bright flavors, but was maybe a little bit like an apricot, of course, but very kind of dense, rich, meaty kind of smell and flavor. And that's the first smell I get off of this, is this really kind of sweet, dark, kind of yellow, fleshy fruit character. It's got acidity, and the acidity is there, but it's kind of a softer acid. And this wine has super kind of It makes me salivate. The acidity is actually quite different. It tastes, instead of being like kind of strong green apple, this is almost like tangerine or something. And there's very little citric acid. Wine grapes have citric acid, but usually you don't see that. Sometimes in Sauvignon Blanc and that. This has like a little bit of that kind of edge to it. In the finish now, I even get a little bit of like a citrus peel, and by that white pith in between the skin and the flesh of the fruit, you get that kind of very kind of rich, kind of mealy character. This has just a touch of that, but super beautiful. But wine should tell a story. Manufactured wine is consistent, and business likes that. Great wine should tell the story of the variety, the place, the people, what they eat, how they drink in that, by the type of wine that they make. And so this wine very much speaks to that vintage, which is a beautiful vintage. The Germans are very excited about the 22 vintage because they make mostly dry wines. And this is kind of on the drier side, so you get this fleshiness and this weight. I think about, beautiful, as we move into the summer, chicken with a mango sauce, or even beautiful fish taco, with grilled fish and a little mango sauce, something like that. Asian food would be spectacular. It's a little bit kind of beefier. You could have it with like noodles and gravy kind of thing, but super beautiful. Still fresh, elegant, but a wine that's a little bit different than what we normally know the Mosel for. So with that, I'd like to say, as always, thank you for your support. We love what we do, and it would not be possible without you drinking and sharing our wine. So with that, thank you, and to the genie in the bottle.